In 1907 in Zurich, Switzerland, Sabine Spielrein, a hysterical woman, is held down by two men as the carriage goes to Bergolzi Clinic. She screams and yells as the carriage stops in front of the institute. Then the staff helps them carry her inside as she continues to scream and flail. In one of the treatment rooms, Carl Jung, a psychiatrist, introduces himself to Sabine. He tells her that he is the one who admitted her to the institute. Looking really manic and shivering, Sabine tries to tell him that she is not insane, but her actions speak otherwise. Jung proposes to talk to her every day for an hour or two to help figure out what is troubling her. He explains that he will sit behind her to be a distraction, and she must try not to look at him as much as possible. He then walks past her and sits behind her. Sabine tries to shield herself, scared of being hurt. After sitting down, Jung asks Sabine what causes her attacks. She struggles to say the word humiliation, as her body contorts as she tries. She continues by telling him that her father always loses his temper with her. He would always beat his children and then make them kiss his hand after. The following day, Sabine and Jung walk down a forest path. Sabine tells him about her angel, a voice in her head that helps her know what people will say before they say it. Jung says it would be a good ability for her to have as a doctor. A dream that she doesn't believe will happen. Going deeper into the woods, Jung apologizes to Sabine, telling her he will be away for some time to do mandatory military service. She rants that it's a waste of time and breaks down as she throws her coat. Jung tries to calm her down. He then picks up her coat and beats it to remove the dirt, which triggers Sabine. The next day, Sabine rebels and refuses to eat. Her nurse tries to reason with her, but when the situation becomes too much, she calls for Dr. Bueller. A few moments later, Bueller goes to Sabine's room to check in on her. The nurse accompanies him but finds no one in her room. Meanwhile, outside the institute, three of the staff struggle to get Sabine under control. She splashes around in a filthy pond, refusing to get out. Bueller arrives and asks her if she has any hobbies that can occupy her, making her reply suicide. She also tells them that she never wants to see Jung ever again. Left with no choice, the staff forcibly takes Sabine out of the pond and carries her to the bathroom against her will. The nurses put her in the tub and wash her as she finally calms down. A few weeks later, Jung returns and visits Sabine in her room. He offers her a chance to learn medicine by following him with research and work. An offer that makes Sabine stop sulking as it piques her interest. She then hides her excitement by turning away from him. The next day, Jung has an interview session with Sabine again. He asks her about her sleepless nights. She tells him that she cannot sleep at night because she hears a presence, like a cat, whispering in her ear but doesn't understand it. She then tells him that she feels a slimy feeling on her back. After a few minutes, Jung asks if she felt aroused when she felt the slime on her back. Sabine tells him she did, which makes her realize that she enjoys the pain and humiliation. She then tells him that she should never be let out of the institute. 2 years later, Emma and Jung went to Vienna, Austria, to meet with Freud. On a carriage, the couple heads to Freud's home. Inside Freud's office, Jung tells him about the effectiveness of psychoanalysis. Freud then asks about Sabine's case and her treatment. Jung tells him that her deep-rooted traumas cause her to have unhealthy sexual tendencies. A fact that Freud says is common for his patients. Later that day, at the bar, Freud and Jung continue their conversation. Freud tells him that the sexual nature of his study is an issue that is unacceptable to the public. He also tells Jung that his studies are being delayed due to the dangers of the media misrepresenting them. That night in Freud's office, Jung tells him about a dream he had of a horse being slowed down by a log, a carriage, and a horse with a rider. Freud deduces that the horse represents Jung, and the things slowing him down are his wife, children, and potential children in the future. As for the log, Freud tells him that it might represent his penis as a symbol of fertility. Back in Switzerland, Jung meets up with Sabine and discusses his meeting with Freud. He tells her that he thinks there's more about the study than the sexual aspects of it, but Sabine argues that Freud is right and that her case proves it. A few days later, Otto Gross, a drug-fueled doctor who uses sexual methods in his study, is sent to be admitted to Bergolzi. Along with his arrival is a letter from Freud, instructing them that Otto should not be released until he takes charge of his case in October. They should also be careful because he can be dangerous. At Jung's office, Jung tries to interview Gross, who seems very uninterested and claims nothing is wrong with him. During the interview, Gross goes around the office and through his stuff. He even steals some pills from Jung's drawer and tosses his mail around. That night Otto and Jung smoke together and talk about their differences in opinion. Otto tries to convince him that monogamy restricts people from freedom. Jung argues that their job is to treat people, even bringing up the story about Otto's patient who took her own life. With no regret or remorse in his voice, Otto tells him that he only gave her the release she wanted. The next day, Jung meets up with Sabina by the bay. She tells him that opposites are prone to attract, and with it comes creation. She then kisses him and offers to spend intimate time with him at her home anytime. The next day, Otto and Jung talk about Sabina's actions. Otto thinks he should indulge in her and sees no wrong in following his urges. Jung tries to deny it and tells Otto that the more they talk, the more sure he is of his methods and research. Otto then argues that it's the other way around for him. The day after, Jung meets with Sabina in his office. Jung confides in her about his worries related to Otto. He feels scared that he's getting affected and influenced by Otto's words, thinking that he might actually follow his primal urges instead of his rationality. Meanwhile, at the back of the institute, Otto sleeps with one of the nurses who provided him with a ladder. After indulging in pleasure, he uses the ladder to escape over the wall. Later that day, Jung goes to Otto's room after hearing the news of his disappearance. Looking around the messy room, Jung finds Otto's letter for him. In it, Otto thanks Jung for everything. He advises Jung not to waste his opportunity and ends the letter by asking Jung to tell his father that he died. That night, Jung goes to Sabina's home, finally giving in. The two share an intimate night as soon as he enters the door. After that, Jung visits Sabina again. She kisses him, but he tries to stop her and seriously tells her to end their affair. However, she doesn't listen to him and only tries to seduce him more. A few days later, Emma gives birth to Jung's first son, and Jung happily comes home to them. Emma then asks if he'll return to her now that they have a family. A few months later, Jung meets with Freud again. Freud admits that it's a mistake to send Otto to him. However, Jung tells him that he is actually grateful that he did because it helped him be certain of his decision. Freud then tells him without Otto around, Jung is now the successor to his work. That night, Jung and Freud get into an argument. Jung tells him that there has to be something more to psychoanalysis than the sexual aspect of it. He tries to make Freud understand that there is no such thing as coincidence. Freud argues that their study is so fragile that they should only study things based on science. A few days later, Jung takes Freud on a boat ride. While on the boat, Freud tells Jung about the rumors of him and Sabina, but Jung denies the allegations. Freud then tells him that he also doesn't believe it, and that's what he's been telling everyone. The next day, Jung goes to meet with Sabina intending to end their affair. Sabina begs him not to go, but Jung is persistent, not wanting to ruin his career. He then leaves as she starts breaking down. The next morning, while eating breakfast, Emma asks Jung if he knows anything about the anonymous letters, causing him to freeze in shock. She then tells him that she doesn't expect her to let him go without a fight, making it clear that Sabina wrote them. After that, Sabina sends a letter to Freud asking to meet with him. She tells him that it's something that will benefit them both. Confused by the letter, Freud writes to Jung about it. Jung then explains that the writer is Sabina, who may intend to take revenge on him for what happened. Jung warns him that she is unpredictable and that he should avoid helping her. A few days later, Freud decides to respond to Sabina's letter. He tells her that he doesn't believe her allegations against Jung. He also wishes not to get involved in their affair. Whatever it is should remain between her and Jung alone. The following day, Sabina goes to Jung's office, where she sees him packing. Sabina confronts him about the letter and tells him to tell the truth to Freud. She also requests to be Freud's patient, which he agrees to do. A few nights later, on the ferry heading to America, Jung and Freud discuss Jung's dream about a father refusing to die. Freud deduces that the old man represents himself, making the situation awkward. Freud then hints at the dream he had but refuses to tell him. At Jung's home, Sabina arrives to deliver her dissertation on the order of Freud. She tells him that Freud believes it's what Jung needs for his yearbook. They then agree to work on it together, trying to brush past their history. On Tuesday of the following week, Jung and Sabina work on her paperwork to publish it. The two enjoy working on it together, eventually falling back into their old habits of indulging each other. Later that day, Sabina tells him about her plan to leave Zurich after graduation. Jung then starts breaking down, finally admitting how he feels about her. 2 years later, in Vienna, Freud commends Sabina's study but also criticizes her for adding religion to it. She then asks if that's what he and Jung had a dispute about, which he denies. He admits that he was mistaken about him as his successor. He then changes the subject by offering 2 of his patients for her to treat. In September, Jung strikes a conversation with Freud about his discussion on Akhenaten. He tries to explain that there might be something more to it, like a son wanting to surpass his parent and move on with his life. Freud then points out that's the reason why he was not credited in Jung's book. Jung explains that he did it because he thinks Freud is already famous and doesn't need to mention him anymore. A few moments later, the two continue to argue until Freud has a stroke, collapsing to the ground. Luckily, he survives it. During the next few days, they exchange letters not as friends or colleagues but as oppositions. They both question the other's credibility and eventually go their separate ways by cutting each other out of their lives. A year later, Emma and Sabina have breakfast together. Emma then asks if she can help her husband, who has become confused and sleepless. Hearing Jung's worsening condition, Sabina hesitates but tells her she'll try. After that, Sabina sits with Jung by the riverside and tries to speak reason into him. Jung shares that he's been having apocalyptic dreams of a flood washing him away. However, he changes the topic when asked what he thinks his dream means. He asks her instead about her plans, to which she casually responds that she plans to return to Russia and become a psychiatrist there. However, he still harbors doubt and hate against Freud whenever he remembers him. Sabina then reminds him that Freud's method, which he used in her treatment, cured her. Suddenly, Jung confesses his regret for letting her go as she was the most important thing in his life, for his love for her made him understand who he is. However, things have changed, and for better or worse, they still choose to go their separate ways. In the end, they individually pursued their own ambitions, as Sabina became a distinct trainer of the most distinguished analyst of the new Soviet Union and Jung as the world's leading psychologist during the First World War. However, despite many recognitions, Freud was driven out of Vienna by the Nazis and died of cancer in London.